Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started, though I see that there are folks still coming in. We are happy to have you here. Welcome to the Disco Network Presents Content Creation and the End of Social Media. My name is Catherine Knight Steele. I'm an associate professor at Maryland in the University of Maryland in the Department of Communication at College Park. I direct the Black Communication or BCAT lab at the UMD, and the BCAT lab is a part of the Disco Network. If this is your first time joining a Disco Network event, let me tell you a little bit about us. DISCO, or the Digital Inquiry, Speculation, Collaboration, and Optimism Network, is a national network of researchers, artists, technologists, policymakers, and practitioners that are working to envision a new anti-racist, anti-ableist digital future. Housed at the University of Michigan's Digital Studies Institute, we work collectively to provide mentoring and networking opportunities, to publish open access research on the intersection of identity and technology, and to host public programming to continue to build in the right fields of race, gender, disability, and technology studies. I'd also like to share our accessibility statement. The Disco Network and Digital Studies Institute is committed to accessibility and digital equity. As such, we do invite our audience members to experience this event in whatever ways bring you the most comfort. CART captioning is available. We are grateful to our CART captioner who is on the call. Captions may be accessed via the Show Captions button. If you do experience any technological issues throughout the event, please feel free to send a message using the chat, and our event staff will assist you. I'm going to take a little bit of privilege before I introduce our panel to offer my thanks and gratitude to our team at the Disco Network who makes this possible. You're going to see them posting throughout in the chat. They are the folks who made sure that the registration link worked. They are the ones who are running the technical support. And I also want to always give gratitude to the folks behind the scenes whose names that we never know, the folks who work at our individual institutions that make it possible for us to do the research and teaching and writing that we do. We welcome all of those folks to be in conversation with us, and we welcome all of you to be in solidarity with those folks at your individual institutions, recognizing that their labor and our labor are intricately intertwined, and that we do not do the work that we do without their work and labor as well. So I also now want to welcome and introduce our amazing panel. I was just saying before this call that this is entirely selfish on my part. These are just the folks I want to hear from, these brilliant, brilliant folks about the work that they do and their thoughts on this topic around content creation. I'm going to start by introducing Professor Crystal Abidin, who is a digital anthropologist and ethnographer of vernacular internet cultures, researching influencer cultures, attention economies, and social media pop culture, especially in the Asia Pacific region. She has published over 250 articles and chapters, 16 special issues, 5 authored books, and 4 edited books, including Internet Celebrity, Understanding Fame Online, Instagram, Visual Social Media Cultures, and Tumblr, Curation, Creativity, and Community. Her newest books are TikTok and Youth Cultures and Child Influencers, How Children Become Entangled with Social Media Fame. Crystal is a professor of Internet Studies, the director of the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab, and the founder of TikTok Cultures Research Network at Curtin University. Thank you so much and welcome, Crystal. Our next panelist is Brooke Erin Duffy, who is associate professor in the Department of Communication at Cornell University, where she's also a member of the Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies faculty. Her research interests include digital and social media industries, gender identity and inequality, and the impact of new technology on creative work and labor. She's the author of 2 monographs on gender and cultural production, including Not Getting Paid to Do What You Love, Gender, Social Media, and Aspirational Work, which draws upon research with fashion bloggers, YouTubers, and Instagrammers to explore culture and politics of the digital labor. In addition, she's co-author of Platforms and Cultural Production. Please join me in welcoming Brooke Erin Duffy. And finally, we have Kelechi Okafor, who is a British-Nigerian multidisciplinary artist, writer, presenter, actor, and political commentator. She's the creator and host of the podcast Say Your Mind, with more than 280 episodes, exploring self-reclamation through an unflinching critique of society. Kelechi has written books for children, young adults, and adults, often engaging in themes of Black identity, Power, Surveillance, and Systemic Injustice. Her work extends beyond literature and media into political commentary and social advocacy, with a particular focus on issues affecting Black women. She's known for her sharp critiques of institutional racism and performative activism, consistently calling for material change and accountability. In 2025, she released her speculative novel, Awakened. Her upcoming young adult novel, Are You Still Watching, will be published in September of this coming year, or this year, excuse me. Through her artistic and social practice, Kelechi continues to create transformative spaces, challenge dominant narratives, and amplify marginalized voices. Thank you and welcome to Kelechi as well. I am just so thrilled to be in conversation with you all. I've been thinking so much for the last couple of years about content creation and specifically now, I've been thinking about it because I'm back to teaching undergrads. I've been away from the classroom for a while and I'm teaching a media theory course. And it's my first time teaching the class since the height of the pandemic. And I'm struck by just how much has shifted as I try to provide relevant applications of theory to their like socially mediated lives. How often I have to detail how platforms used to function just a few years ago. Talk about the idea of connecting with friends and creating groups and doing organizing online. It just strikes me how many affordances of platforms have changed in such a short period of time. So, I guess my opening question to this panel is from your perspective, what are folks getting out of social media use right now? How has that changed in your estimation over the last, 5 or 10 years? What's been lost? What's been gained in that process? And, to satisfy my own idea, is it even reasonable for me to expect that sociality is a part of social media platforms in our present? Anyone can jump in on this one, and everyone, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And let me just say thank you, Catherine. It is such a delight to be in conversation with you all, and thank you to the organizers. And I appreciate this question because it allows us to kind of tease out the changes and continuities in social media. And we think of this as something new, but the internet is 30 years old. YouTube celebrated its 2-decade anniversary, and even a lot of social media activities now can be situated on a much longer cultural timeline when we're thinking about legacy media. But I think you're right in this sense of change, especially in the wake of the pandemic and how we use social media. And so, like in broad strokes, this is no longer seen as a place where we connect with our friends, but it's a site for commerce and civic life. And we see social media making inroads into news and health. And so a lot of confluences. I think one of the big shifts, and especially given the kind of focus on social media and creators, is how we think about performativity and this notion of who participates in the visibility economies of social media. And so fast forward a decade ago, and this was something that, we thought of YouTubers who were like, please subscribe and begging folks at the bottom of their channels. But what we've seen over the past decade is all of us are kind of exhorted to be creators now and thinking about how we can polish our self-presentation, but also hold on not just to this idea of authenticity, which is such a kind of loaded catchphrase, but like vulnerabilities. And so how do we monetize our vulnerabilities? So I think that kind of shift from authenticity to vulnerability is really compelling. I think algorithms, of course, well predate the pandemic, but the fact that they have become such a part of culture where I think just yesterday I was on Facebook and I saw people in like a babysitting group that are like, pick of my cute dog for the algorithm. And so, to Crystal's work about the vernacular cultures, like this algo speak where we all kind of understand the role. We know that platform companies have this opacity within how they operate the platforms, but we're kind of much more in the know. Um, and so, this notion of what has been gained, what has been lost, I think one thing that has been gained is a sense of legitimacy and professionalization. It's no longer kind of this generational hand wringing of like, oh, these kids that are creating content on social media. This is seen as much more of a bona fide career, not fully, but um, But the question, your question of what is lost, I think, really resonates with me. And, without trying to wax nostalgic too much, my knee-jerk reaction is this kind of notion of everything is overlaid with this discourse of professionalism. And so it's hard to see these spaces where, people are not thinking about how the algorithm is going to garner visibility, or we're not thinking about how to promote ourselves in earnest. And so coming back to the old, like I think it was from 1994, the cartoon of on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That feels just like a totally different life world when all of us are compelled to have this veneer of promotionalism. And then finally, you pose this question of is sociality kind of reasonable for us to expect from these platforms? And I think given what we know at this exact moment, probably not. And so I think that's why the like from the bottom we're finding out we're using platforms in different ways and kind of reverting to some of the older spaces like chats and WhatsApp in order to exert more control given the perverse power of these platform companies.
Shall I chime in? Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Catherine, for having all of us. I'm an anthropologist by training. My first degree was also in sociology, so I'm going to be speaking from that lens. Um, so last decade, that's a long time. I think we can think about the 2010s as a period of significant change. I'll speak to this specifically from the point of view of followers and then from the point of view of influencers. So for the followers, five main changes. One, we used to speak of an archive culture. You remember back in the day where you used to manually memorize blog addresses and key in HTTPS, colon, backslash, and then the name of your favorite creator or blogger or website or forum.com.net. It was a place that stored information. And if you wanted to go back there, scroll through archives, that was how you looked for information, even an online forum. But we're moving from archive culture to streaming culture, not just in the sense of literal live streaming, but streaming as in it's on demand, in real time, blink and you miss it. It's been really hilarious for me to talk to first year undergrads and even to my toddlers at home about how, yes, back in the day, I could not just pause television and then go and take a wee, as they have the luxury of doing so. But it feels that way now for social media. If I take a pause and go on a 2-week downtime, coming back feels impossible to catch up, even as an ethnographer with a whole set of strategies and skills, because things just whoosh past you immediately. For our followers, the second thing that has changed is that we used to partake in tasteful consumption. Brooke's early work looked a lot at aspirational labor and how we followed influencers because we wanted to be like them, or for better or for worse, we felt inspired by them. But in the pandemic, when there was a period of forced digitalization, we are moving from tasteful consumption to the amateur aesthetic. Everyone now aspires to be someone else who looks already like them. We're looking not to the top 1%, but to people who are partaking in everyday practices, get ready with me routines, making your own matcha, everything in the locus of a home, because partly also we have shifted from influencer culture to creator culture, which I'm happy to talk more about as our conversation moves on. Thirdly, we used to have platformed fame. You were known as an Instagrammer, a tweeter, a YouTuber, etc. But the demands of the industry now force you to have cross-platform influence. Platforms are also encouraging you to splice and edit your contents rather than repost. You do get penalized for it when it's found out that a same piece of short video content is taken from multiple places. Watermarks are also now excessively placed in a post whenever you download the content you create yourself. 4, we are slowly progressing from the attention economy to the affection economy. It's not so much what we're interested in and how our attention is scarce and where we choose to oxygenate what we see. It's more vibes, moods, and feelings. And lots of younger generations of scholars, much smarter than I am, have theorized what it feels like when you go there for an atmospheric, static feeling as opposed to a desire. Finally, even though platforms are increasingly becoming very metric oriented, we are moving from quantitative metrics to qualitative impact because everyone now is able to argue that there is some sort of a super duper nano micro sort of creator or celebrity. And it means very little to brands if you say you've got 1 million followers versus 1 million views on 1 out of 1,000 TikToks. So therefore, you see the ways people are branding themselves now is more qualitative in what they do, what they stand for, the legacy of their ethics and social justice practices. To give you an example. What does this mean for influencers? What has been gained and what has been lost? They used to do creation, aspiration, have the master status of an influencer, do endorsement, and focus on engagement. Some of that has now made way to a new set of social cultural norms. Not curation, but co-presence. Not so much aspiration, but relatability. Not always master status, as in this is who I am, but persona play, having different aspects of yourself come out in different platforms or even different accounts. Not so much just endorsements, but testimonials, persuading you back in the days of, say, MySpace and Friendster, where you could just have the top 5 or top 6 verify that you were a good human being to people online. And not pure engagement, but reputation. How do people believe the legacy of your word? What else have you put online? Through extremely CSI techniques, can I corroborate what you said yesterday, 2 years ago, 10 years ago? And how does that reflect on a version of you today? Is sociality still a reasonable aim? Well, I'll argue it's still there. It just looks different. We are seeing it in closed groups, locked Facebook pages, massive Discord chats, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups of over 200 people. One of the largest groups I studied with my colleague Meg Chung had 1.8 million people in a locked Facebook group, and they called themselves an online community. We would hardly tend to think of that as an online community back in the day, but sociality just looks different when platforms are manipulating and shaping us to organize in different ways.
Per usual, my pen is just trying to keep up as you all are talking. I'm so glad this is being recorded.
Yeah, just again, like it's been said already, thank you for having this space, or organizing this space. As somebody who it's brilliant to hear Brooke and Crystal essentially talk about what I feel that I've been doing in the last few, I want to say last few years, but it's been a long time. And it's, for me, ultimately what I notice as being somebody that's been, I guess, creating content for so many years and being very resistant to aesthetics. I feel like suddenly I'm in my element. I do not like a curated feed, never have. I just want to grab my phone and post. But I remember when that wasn't good on, Instagram, so I didn't really use Instagram, for instance, as much. I would use Twitter more because I could just fire off my thoughts, much more quickly. And then when I noticed that Instagram started shifting really around 2020, because people were at home and they couldn't make everything as beautiful as they wanted because the world was burning, I just, then I started posting on there, and I had way more people engaging with me than before because suddenly I could just do it how I've always been doing it. But now people were more receptive to it. Ultimately, I feel like the reason that I've noticed that people are online and they use social media in the way that they do is because ultimately everybody wants to be seen. They want to remember that they matter, that they were here. Sometimes I stumble upon the most random videos, and then I look in the comment section and see people having a great time there. The most random thing that I wouldn't even think anyone would create a video about, but ultimately there is that yearning to be seen. Before, when we had this sort of hierarchical structure in terms of the media, how it functions, it was like, these are the celebrities, not you. They're important, not you. And so to me, it felt like a forced reverence. And I have always had a thing about eschewing authority. I'm not going to worship celebrities because nobody is above me and I'm above nobody. So celebrity culture has always seemed rather vile to me. And so to see that shift happening, where especially around 2020, where people actually started mocking celebrities a bit because they were so out of touch with what was happening, and singing songs about random things and getting together, we could see that the power was kind of shifting from celebrity culture to the everyday person. Whilst that sounds great, I noticed something rather sinister in that as well, because obviously when people are posting more, I noticed when, or I remember when reels, for instance, were being encouraged on Instagram, and all of these videos, you were being encouraged to suddenly start making longer videos, not 30 seconds, make it a minute, make it 3 minutes. I remember having this visceral kind of feeling of, this is being used to train AI. We're being asked to be in front of our cameras for much longer because it's something is learning our face, like something, it wants to know our expressions. It wants to know when we do, all of these random things. They got me. They've had me for a while, but everybody else, like, let's think about this. And lo and behold, we're seeing more kind of artificial intelligence. We're seeing more deep fakes. We're seeing more of these things because we are giving the kind of, we're giving these systems or these companies our faces for free. And another sinister thing that I noticed is that, as mentioned by Crystal, we are the job is now, we're now in the home, essentially, right? So therefore, especially when people were working from home during 2020, but now the work doesn't stop. We have to keep feeding an insatiable beast that is social media. And so now you're at home, well, you can get your camera out at any time, you can make content at any time. Now, lighting is accessible. Everyone's pretty much got a microphone that they can have at home. So the lines between what is work and what isn't is becoming extremely blurred. But because these platforms are now monetizing as well, like on TikTok, you have 10,000 followers and you make videos and they do rather well, then you're getting paid for it. So people are finding other, income streams as well. At the time that the governmental structures are becoming more stringent about how we earn, and cost of living is absolutely abysmal. So people are going to be more inclined to make these things in order to keep this kind of system going. On the flip side of that, when we're talking about the sociality and everything else, I would argue that due to like the globalization brought about by social media, Black people, I can speak for specifically, or speak about specifically, um, have been able to garner a kind of collective integrity and voice that was otherwise denied to us because of legacy media and because of the hierarchical structures in place. So for instance, if somebody did get, become a victim of police brutality, the channels through which you could hear about that story accurately, very, very few. Absolutely very few. But what social media allowed was for us to be able to tell our own stories, which takes me back to what I was saying initially about us being seen. Finally, people were able to are able to be seen on their own terms. Now, what they want to be seen for and the repercussions of being seen in that way, that's a whole that's a whole other discussion. But ultimately, I'm grateful for what social media has provided to a certain degree, because we've been able to be our own sort of journalists, as it were, not professional in that way, but to tell stories that we wouldn't otherwise know. We know that, for instance, right now, the atrocities taking place in the world, if it wasn't for the people who are in these spaces themselves with a camera, with a camera phone, with a social media platform, we wouldn't know the extent, the gravity of what's happening, and then be able to collectively speak out against it. To me, that's worth any. So if we're talking about sociality in terms of, oh, I'm not meeting up with my mates and having a laugh, yeah, we could argue that that's been skewed in some way. But in terms of mobilization, what we've been able to do to push against particular types of regimes and also to educate each other across spheres, that's really invaluable. Hence, people buying, nefarious characters buying shares in companies and in order to strangulate said platforms, so we can't use those as modalities or vehicles to share the same messages in the same way.
Oh, it's so helpful. I have like 7 bullet points I want to come back to. I love this thread that we're kind of thinking through how things evolved over time, what we had the capacity to do, and how the affordances of the platform are challenging, are encouraging us in certain directions. And like a thread I heard through all three is really about the relationship in some ways between content creation as a practice of labor. And I hear that like in all of your work in various different ways. Crystal, I want to come back to you to give us a better distinction between influencers and content creators in just a moment, because I think you can give us a really nice transition there. But maybe, Brooke, you could start off a conversation for us, thinking about your work always helps me think through the relationship between labor and gender and digitality in these ways. Is engagement with social media and content creation, is all content creation labor? I mean, why does that matter for these individual content creators we're talking about? How does that matter for those of us who are viewing and interacting with the content itself? Does situating all of this production that we're doing online as labor have impacts beyond the individual in some ways that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm happy to be following up on Kelechi thinking through some of these issues, especially in the pandemic moment. In crude economic terms, like of course, all of the activity that we perform on social media can be understood in a kind of platform capitalist frame as labor. Creators supply the economic lifeblood that keeps these companies going, both in terms of providing content and the sort of engagement you alluded to is what keeps these systems running. Like YouTube knew early on, a platform is only as good as its content. And so coming back to Kelechi's point about the pandemic, I mean, I think it's fascinating to see what seems to me this kind of like pivot to creators that mainstream platform companies undertook in a particular moment, which was early 2021. And so, thinking about this, you had in the US context where I primarily work, you saw this profound uptick in TikTok where people were performing their, again, more relatable, less aspirational elements of their life. And the other platform companies were kind of scrambling. This is short form video. We don't do this at the time. At the same time, the bigger transformation around all of us was the labor market shifts. We saw widespread redundancies and layoffs and people participating in a Great Recession. And even those who still had their jobs were really forced to reckon with this moment of this job is not providing me with the provisions, the safety, the benefits that led me to gravitate towards it. It's kind of in the framework of Sarah Jaffe's work. It's like work won't love you back. And so you have this perfect storm of people trying to make sense of the role of work in their lives and the role of social media in their lives. And so platform companies really capitalized on this. And by platform companies, I mean mainstream US platform companies that build themselves as social media sites. And so Facebook and Instagram and Snap and Twitter. All of a sudden, if you look at the corporate discourses at this particular moment, they undertook this pivot to creators where all of a sudden they were reaching out to creators, off trying to woo them with bonuses. Meta at one point was paying $5,000 to invited creators. Twitter, later known as X, tried to court Mr. Beast because the idea is if you bring in this top creator, then the audiences will follow. And Snap did something similar. And this isn't corporate benevolence. These companies don't really care if we are feeling creative and have the creative expression and feeling authentic. Meta made $50 billion, I believe, from the shift from users to creators, especially advertising on Reels. And so within that sense, like, yes, of course, this is a labor story, but when I think about the individuals I speak to and how they make sense of the activities they do on social media, I mean, it varies. And so in my earlier work, I was very critical and said, like, no, it's, unless you have the resources, unless you have the privilege, unless you have the capital, it's impossible to break in. And all of a sudden, the virality of TikTok kind of brings this into sharp relief that I was wrong. And so I was talking to people who were saying, I suddenly got this boost on TikTok at the exact moment that my hair studio was shutting down, which I couldn't work at because of stay-at-home orders. And then there's other folks who are gainfully employed. I'm thinking of this orthodontist who got this viral following and was kind of seduced to use this as um, a hustle. And so for these people, the question of whether it's labor or monetizable leisure is blurry. It differs. I think it's important to consider how they pay attention to it alongside with the kind of political economic elements. And so why does this matter? It matters for them because the degree of platform dependence that drives this system shapes your experience as a creator. And so if you're just earning passive income while maintaining your regular job, it doesn't matter if Instagram updates their algorithm or TikTok changes their creator fund. But if your livelihood depends on this, you were so fearful in the US context when TikTok may have disappeared, or you are so concerned when Instagram announces an update that shifts the chronology of your feed, or whether your audience disappears because you are allegedly shadow banned, where you think the platform is concealing you. And this disproportionately impacts creators at the margins. That degree of platform dependence matters from a labor story. And why it matters for users goes back to an issue that well predates social media. And we can think of in the context of word of mouth. If someone is getting paid, their view is understood from a different framework. And this happens all the time, and Crystal's work has addressed this extensively in kind of an influencer marketing context. But thinking about what happens when people also in political context or news or lobbying are paid under the table from politicians without disclosing the payment, that matters. And so I think, again, teasing out this distinction between labor and leisure is important to do from the various social actors participating in this.
That's so good. Thinking about this in all these various contexts. And it brings up for me something in your work, Kelechi, around there's leisure, and then there's also this space of activism. There's this space of like not being a political actor in the sense of an elected official, but someone who uses content as a mechanism to reach back, to pull folks forward, to tell stories. And I'm wondering the impact of content, of the ethos around content creation in relationship to something like anti-racist work, right? So how do we like square the idea of doing work that is for community and in community alongside this idea of monetization? Like what are the tentacles and how they intertwine? How does that impact us as those of us who want to make a difference in those spaces, as well as people who are monetizing those spaces for, to pay bills?
I think it's such a difficult one, and I think everybody, I hope the sound is better now. I think everybody navigates it differently. I personally, I, I I find it difficult. I wouldn't be able to monetize directly the way that in fact, I would say that the things that I say on social media and have done throughout the years, it's been helpful to a certain degree, but it's also been an obstacle because I will call out whichever party I don't think is doing right. I will call out the government. I will call out the monarchy. I will say something. I really don't care. My motto is anybody can get it. So, with that being said, there are other people, my peers, who, because they really toe the line very well, they can go and do something with the mayor of London, even though something's happened that I think is rather atrocious. They can get into that space and be paid and be platformed so they can make even more money. At the same time, I write speculative fiction with, each of my books are with the big five, one of the big five publishers, whether it's children's books or adult fiction or young adults. Now they're having a hard time because I'm saying the things that I'm saying on social media and they need to do the publicity. They need to do all of these things. But what I'm writing about also links with what I'm talking about. That it's like these things haven't caught up with each other. Authenticity or vulnerability hasn't caught up with publishing, hasn't caught up with so many different aspects of the traditional industry that we speak of. So whilst I might be doing these things that I know are benefiting the collective, I take a financial hit every single time. We mentioned the 280 episodes that I have had of my previous podcast. I've started a new podcast now, but that at one point it got so popular that then I had live reads. So I'd be paid quite a bit for doing the live reads in between my podcast episode. Then lots of things started kicking off geopolitically. Now my listeners who trust me and trust my stance are writing to me saying, "Oh, you can't work with that sponsor," or we don't feel comfortable with you talking or promoting this sponsor because they're doing this and they're funding this. So I'm having to cut out these sponsors. But I'm a mum raising a child primarily by myself, living in central London, a black woman at that. So there are so many other factors that are working, one might say, against me. And now my audience is saying, we trust you. And because we trust you, you need to divest from these sponsors. So I then have to let the sponsors go because I essentially, as one would say, I need to back my chat. I said I stood for this. Now I need to stand for it. So then where does the revenue come from? Knowing that social media algorithmically it's not going to share certain videos that I'm making because I'm saying certain things. Publishing, they can't really push me in terms of book sales because the news stations and the daytime TV shows that my peers can go on, I can't go on because they're scared I'm going to bring something up and lift up the veil that we're all really just pretending. So it- I it then had to start being creative. And who inspired me? Funnily enough, it was the right wing. It was the right wing people. Would you believe it? Because when they were getting thrown off these platforms for their heinous hate speech and all of those things, they went and had their smaller communities, even though we're saying that some of these communities can have like 1.8 million people as part of it. They went off and started their own community. So I thought, okay, I'm going to build my own space on my website, have a members area on my website that's, the subscribers, people subscribe and they pay a particular amount a month. And based on the number of people who follow me across platforms, that should sustain me and help me to bring in a similar revenue to what I should be making in certain instances. So I know that there are people who are happy to do a performative type of activism to keep getting money, and then sometimes they do a collaboration, and I'm thinking, what is going on? But there's this understanding that, well, they need to pay their bills, and I just think, okay, at what point does it stop then? Very recently, it's really timely that we're having this conversation in terms of qualitative and quantitative, right? Because just recently, my most recent video rather hit 1 million views, talking about what happened at the BAFTAs. I wouldn't even say that's my best video. I'm stumbling over words, but I just wanted to kind of get out my train of thoughts at the time. And I looked at it and I had mixed feelings about it because it feels like there's also this economy of this kind of tense discourse. And then in people's minds, when they see me or they see somebody like me, when you see me, is it that I'm coming to argue about something else? Am I coming to, challenge something else? And sometimes you do want to be softer. So I love the point that was made about the various faces. You do want to be able to present various faces whilst understanding that everybody, to some degree, I would argue, is performing online. There is this psychosocial element to things where what you want to get from your audience, or how you want to be perceived, and so you're going to send out certain signifiers in order to achieve that very thing. I want to, if we're being frank, I want to perform authenticity, relatability, right, whilst being active, fit, being in this world. So I don't tend to wear makeup when I make a lot of my videos. I would have just finished a run. You tend to trust somebody who takes their fitness a little bit seriously, right? So I'm very aware of the psychological things that I am doing in order to garner the kind of audience that I want, in order to impact the kind of change that I desire. And I don't think enough people are honest about that, or they don't realize that that's what they're doing. And it comes down to, okay, what are you doing it for? I'm doing it because I want for us to have a collective type of liberation. How do you do that? Well, you have to let people feel like the barriers are down and there's space for us all, because there is, but you literally have to perform it for people to believe it.
Crystal, I'd love to get you in the conversation here to maybe talk to us a little bit about like social movements and social justice also as labor. I think Kelechi has given us a great segue to maybe move into that space as well.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Kelechi. That was really helpful hearing from the other side, so to speak, as an anthropologist who spends quite a lot of time with influencers and creators. If I can add to your point, I think a lot about how a lot of the work we do these days on social media platforms tends to have a tangible end goal. Both Brooke and Kelechi have earlier on intimated that gone are the days where we can just do leisure on social media. There is the larger narrative of neoliberalism, hustle culture. There's also the real realities that everyone is practicing micro-celebrity techniques as they used to in the days where Teresa Sempt wrote about this in the late 2000s and Alice Marwick did in the early 2010s. Micro-celebrity as a concept was in the beginning a way to market yourself, market your business, get people interested in you as a self-brand. Now, on the likes of something like TikTok, which is one of the specialty websites and platforms I focus on, I want to talk specifically about this idea of discursive capital. There are many other different types of capital that we can chat about in a bit, but discursive capital on TikTok is particularly important to present the veneer that despite monetizing your content, despite the frivolity going on in the background, despite all your other posts, perhaps giving people whiplash, looking at many different types of contents that may be incongruent to what you say your baseline ethos is, it is very convincing to convince people that you've got a vested interest in social justice. So discursive capital we can think of as this oratory and literary ability to manufacture persuasion. You do this through mobilizing moral hierarchies. I'm better than you, they're better than that, we're better than everybody else. Or you map lateral relevance across communities of difference. We saw this happen a lot during the pandemic when several East Asians or East Asian appearing people, specifically in the US, started reaching out to each other at a time where Chinese nationals and Chinese diaspora were facing a lot of excessive racist backlash and xenophobia. We saw folks who said, I am clearly Vietnamese, clearly Thai, clearly Myanmar, but if you can't tell, that's okay. I'm not going to respond to racism on the streets of New York by saying, I'm not Chinese, mate. I'm going to say, no, that's racist to us as a collective. And so the lateral relevance between communities of difference there was important for minority groups to come together, to work on their messaging, to invoke empathy, reflection, and resonance. But if we were to be very cynical about it, there is a template for what kind of discursive capital goes viral and is successful on TikTok. And in my recent work on TikTok and youth cultures, there are three main ones. The first we can think of as disquisition tactics, is when TikTokers give you information, but it's very preachy, very elaborate. It serves to provide you with enough evidence for discussion for an issue that they have identified. And stylistically, this looks like my face, usually showing you anger, and then wall of text. So you've got to pause and read. Or it could also be TikTokers ring role playing. This is what I say, here's what a boomer says, this is what Gen Z says. And you're supposed to see the discrepancies when we play different positions and how two different groups have different moral values. So it's a form of call-out culture. The second tactic is diversion. This is very interesting for people who study the attention economy because it looks like you're using one mode of performance or content to capture an audience attention. Usually it's something very provocative like sexy content, sex bait, TikTok dances. But then once I have your attention, I reroute it to focus on a more important conversation. For example, I might be dancing and saying, I am dancing because that's what the algorithm wants. And now that I have your attention, What I really want to show you, analog eyeballs, analog attention, is to tell you about what ICE is doing in the US, for example. And the final tactic is deflection. Usually, TikTokers would adapt from a pre-existing discourse or a static template, and then they would imbue it with their social justice messaging. This is really clever because they're relying on the platform and the audience's familiarity with these templates. And then they're sort of trying to bypass the automated censorship or the censure that they believe comes in with machine vision. The most popular of this is spearheaded by Feroza Aziz, a young person who, back in the day, performed a makeup tutorial and said, I am looking as if I'm doing a makeup tutorial. I'm going to be talking about the Xinjiang genocide in China. Do not use any of these keywords in the comment section. And that has become a wonderful template for people using this template from hair tutorials, makeup tutorials, fashion, cooking, all the way to people talking about financial literacy. But you have to stay a while or follow a few of these TikTokers to match the code words to know if they're talking about a genocide, ICE, climate change, trying to run away from abusive partner, racism, xenophobia, and the like. So there is whole art and science for creators who want to take a social justice stance, but who are aware that they also need to sort of earn an income and stay on the platform. At the same time, there are people who sort of bandwagon on the social justice on a more optics level in order to attract affect and attention. We're not, without really even being able to be recountable or accountable to their audiences about whether that's what they really feel. So I think that's where Kelechi's point was really hitting the heart of the matter for me, because you can't really tell what intentions are, but you can study the templates of presentation and then try and poke holes at whether or not it's sincere.
So helpful. I'm teaching a class called Content Creation for the Public Good right now, and I'm just like meticulously writing down all these notes for my students as we come back and talk about these tactics that are so powerful and so recognized. I think as you named each one of them, I'm picturing I'm picturing a TikToker in my mind right now who's engaging in those practices. I wonder, Crystal, there's one more piece of this that has just been like racking my brain and is related to your most recent books on youth culture and children as well, because I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between like child influencers or content creation or content that's someone else's creation, right? I was having a conversation at with a colleague a couple of days ago at a conference. They're writing about momfluencers and who are capturing the youth of their children as part of their content. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way, and this is really for everyone, right? But the way that youth engage with social media, how is that changing the culture around childhood, around young adulthood, around expectations in those areas as well?
This is simultaneously very interesting to talk about, but also very depressing. I study influences longitudinally as per my training as an anthropologist. So the first generation of now child influencers who I have contact with, I first met as sonograms. These were literally when their moms, either teen moms who at that time as young as 17, or the first wave of influencers in their early 20s were already popular bloggers online. And so at that time, it was novel to narrate and announce your pregnancy. There was benefit to explaining to brands why you could no longer fit certain sizes. There was also benefit to announcing to the world that you're now open to many different verticals in the industry and could take on different kind of adverts. But there was also benefit to your followers in trying to invest and find out more about the tea. Who is the daddy? What's happening here? How are you feeling? Is it twins? Why does your belly flop that way? Is it real? Is it a surrogate? There is a whole economy there of shadow attention and gossip. Now, for these children versus the children today who come on board TikTok versus the other children who are just forced on the screen, like family YouTubers, we all tend to just think about them as youth or child influencers. And then we say that we need regulation, we need corporates to step in, platforms to do something, governments to do something. But the fact of the matter is that words matter because definitions matter, because that impacts regulation and law. Live with a lawyer and you probably know everything is down to pedantics, right? And so for this reason, in my book on child influencers, I decided to trace all the different histories that I was exposed to in work, differentiating how a mommy blogger child is distinct from a family influencer child, different from a child on Kid Talk, a child who's a meme celebrity, a viral star, a variety star, a child model, etc. The ethos there was in trying to figure out in these spaces how much of the child gets a say in documentation, how much of how the child reacts attracts a type of visceral response from people online. Oftentimes, it's the internet sleuths who have a lot of opinions about society in general, who take screen grabs and call out when children do not seem to be treated well online. That attracts journalists who write pieces. People flock to those platforms. It becomes an issue. Platforms that take notice. Platforms change community guidelines. Regulators are pressured to then respond. It's often a reactive kind of trajectory, for better or for worse, because governments do not want to end up as being too paternalistic. Unless, of course, you live in different kind of social cultural regimes, say in the EU, where people subscribe to the fact that you are happy to operate under, say, a specific type of privacy law. Or perhaps in large countries like China, where you agree that governments are benevolent and therefore when they intersect with platform control, it's for your best interests. Now, situating where the child is then matters also because then what voices do the children have if they want to push for redress or they want to opt out? Mommy bloggers, not so much. The child is basically a prop. Even when you look at the point of view from brands, the child is not mentioned in the contract. There is no redress for them. Family influencers, it's usually the momager, the dad manager who signs off. And the forms literally sometimes say this gets paid into your creator account, but you manage the earnings if it trickles down from parent to child. But sign the child influencer, and brands will ensure that if they're on set and filming, there will be someone there who's their guardian. They're filming under the right lighting conditions, the right time, they've got access to food, water. Because if not, and a children's guardian comes down to audit, the brands get in trouble and it hits them where the profits begin. If you think about meme celebrities and viral stars, these are types of celebrity that happen outside of the agency of the person knowing that that's what's happening. There's a lot of visibility there. There's a lot of virality there. It doesn't always translate to monetization. So if you want to talk about holding someone accountable, there's not really a lot of skin in the game for regulators to do much beyond forcing platforms to clamp down on content. Then platforms come in and argue, well, the children are not the creators of content, and we say no, and under 16, they just happen to have the likeness of themselves there, so there's little we can do. These are very frustrating conversations because children then feel like this ball that gets passed around everybody and everybody. And therefore, spelling it out, the genre that they belong to, the origin story, what the celebrity is contingent on, becomes very important when we want to take academic work to regulators and industry and then ask for change.
So important in thinking about this transition to regulation. I don't want to, was there someone about to jump in? I didn't want to cut it. Okay. No, this transition to thinking about how definition matters and how definition of terms over time shifts and how I always love listening to you talk, Crystal, because I always realize that things are so much more complex than I imagined them to be, which is actually the benefit. Like that's why we're researchers, right? Is to actually understand the complexity of these ideas, how they fit together, and then how we can actually ask the right questions toward potentially these kinds of regulatory and policy shifts that would be useful for us. It reminds me also, I think it heard this thread come through in each one of your conversations about, my question was about sociality in a very baseline way. And I think what each of you are pushing me to think more about is how the definition itself of sociality changes, right? And how important it is for us to actually track not our previous conception of what constitutes what is social, but actually to ask the people, right? Anthropology reminds us to ask the people to be around and to find out what it actually looks like. It always reminds me of a conversation back in I think it was 2010 Association of Internet Research when Dana Boyd presented some work on youth culture and privacy. And it was like I was a grad student. It's this mind-blowing experience of like, no, people still care about privacy. It's an entirely different, they mean something different, right? And so it's always a great reminder when I'm having conversations with folks of what these terms mean. So when we are thinking about things like sociality in the relationship to storytelling, for example, Kelechi, I'm thinking of your work. How does your work as a writer, as a director, as a content creator lean into this possibility of storytelling on in applications and on platforms that we've just had a huge discussion about in terms of their monetization potential and their labor varieties and et cetera? How are you building spaces for storytelling that ensures your work gets to the places that you want it to go within this system? Like, what are you noticing about the impact of algorithm on how you reach your audience? You gave us a snippet of some decision making you make about your appearance right beforehand. Are there other ways that you're ensuring that the storytelling practices are still reaching the audience?
There's usually a kind of, I would say there's a kind of signature. What I find helps is, some people, the kind of template they're going for now is that before they start telling you what they want to tell you, they will tell you their credentials. I'm such and such, my name is such and such, and this is what I do, and I'm about to tell you this. I love that. I really, really love it. I'm not going to do it though, because I'm not going to justify what I'm about to say with with these credentials. They're valid, and I love that these people are doing that. But I think that there's another level there of this kind of institutionalization where I need to justify what I know at my lived experience, this visceral thing with a certificate. Somebody has to have given me a certificate to say this thing. However, it's necessary in certain regards. If, for instance, if we're talking about psychology, if we're talking about medicine, sometimes I do want to see a few credentials before you start telling me to go and inject bleach into my veins. So that helps. But if it's something to do with just general things, I do tend to have some kind of catchphrases that I use and turn of phrases that I use as well, which kind of very much localizes me or positions me in London, kind of positions me as a Nigerian. Like there are these things that I bring in to the language, the vernacular that I use, that when people hear that, it draws them in because they're like, that sounds familiar to me, or it doesn't sound familiar to me, but I'm interested in how this goes. Ultimately, everybody's got a story to tell. I think that that's another thing. People want to be seen, but everyone has their story that they want to tell. They might not know how they want to go about it. And I think that that's why these social media companies have been able to profit so much off of this, because everybody essentially wants to be heard. And why I like the phrase that nobody goes about giving somebody else a voice. You only amplify their voice. Everybody's already got their own voice. Nobody's voiceless. That you just intentional. There's intentionality to not hearing them. And when it comes to the way that I write stories, when I was given my book deals, I'm not delusional. I was given my book deals because my platforms were rather relatively large. Like, so the publisher saw my platform and said, "Hey, do you want to write something? You don't even know if I can really write like that. I've written a few articles here and there, yes, but can I write a book? Can I write fiction? Nobody knows." So I wasn't going to be under any illusions about what I was going to do with this. I very much subscribe to subversive activism. I know that I love science fiction and speculative fiction as a genre. I found it fascinating when people were watching the televisation of Handmaid's Tale and they said, "Oh my God, imagine if this ever happened." It's happened to enslaved Black women. It's happened to Latino. What are we actually saying? So I realized that what's happening here is a lack of education in terms of historically as to what has already taken place. We think so many of the things that we're seeing are new simply because that violence is being inflicted on white people or white bodies, that suddenly we are able to see, oh my God, this is atrocious. Kind of like with the Epstein files, I made a video pertaining to that as well, that we read some really heinous things in these documents, and people were surprised. And I said, but not to trigger anybody, but some of these things and even more vicious things arguably were done to enslaved Africans in terms of what was done to their babies, their teeth. There was so much. And people really related to that video because they were unaware of, how things link together. So when it came to choosing what I wanted to talk about in terms of writing the books, like my most recent novel, Black children are going missing in the UK, and when their bodies are found, they're found by bodies of water, and the police immediately will usually say something like, "Oh, they couldn't swim," or maybe they were trafficking drugs. County lines is what we call them. So they were trafficking drugs across county lines. Um, any stereotype that you can think of pertaining to blackness, they would usually go with that, and for that reason, they didn't see it as suspicious. They would say that, there's no reason to investigate. But to me, the kind of frequency of it happening was really unnerving. So I decided that the novel I was going to write, our protagonist, Pels, is going to look into why, these young black people are going missing and being found by bodies of water. But nobody wants to hear, it's institutional, it's systemic oversights. They're not trying to hear that. So there's a secret society of the elite who are stealing the souls of these children in order to garner more wealth and fame and power. If I want to talk about certain things, I can only talk about them in a particular way on social media before someone scrolls. They see sometimes they see a black face. No, scrolling. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You're not wearing makeup. There's nothing about you that's grabbing me. Don't want to hear it. So there has to be other ways that you can get people's attention to talk about the same thing that you're talking about. So ultimately, I say all of that to say, when it comes to storytelling, coming from a background of orators and griots in terms of my Nigerian heritage, you're always having to adapt. More recently, I saw that if I'm going to hold people for a few seconds longer, I need to put a caption at the beginning of the video that kind of sums up what I'm about to say in the video. So that holds them and gives me an in to kind of make my point. Ultimately, again, this is all a strategy, because if I plan to run for mayor of London in 2028, I do not have the money currently to do that. It costs a lot of money to campaign. So what would you do? You start setting people up from now with a story that everybody can align with and kind of buy into by the point that we get there. So that's just how one might say that's rather nefarious, but that's how I have been kind of using social media. There has to be something that you're getting from it. And a lot of people do want something from it. They just don't realize what it is that they want. They don't realize how they can use the story of who they are and how they function in the world to move towards the kind of life or the kind of society they want to see.
Oh, that's so helpful to me. I love that you're bringing in this notion of speculation. I think it's missing from so much of the work that we do to actually imagine differently and to imagine a future different than the one that we currently live in, imagine a paradigm, in fact, different than the one we currently have access to. So maybe in the time we have left before Q&A, I would love for each of you to maybe opine a bit about that future element and thinking about what do you see as the future for content creation and social media, for social media platforms, for those who rely on creators, on information, on entertainment, news, and advice to come from those platforms. I just love us to talk about this as we have been doing in a global context, but about what futures are possible, what futures are we working toward or against, what futures do your work help us prepare ourselves for?
I can get us started. So this is something I think all of us kind of constantly struggle with, which is given the fast pace of change and the kind of breakneck clip that we've seen influencers and creators in social media, as you spoke to at the beginning, how do we think about what's next? And it feels a lot like a moving target. And I'll start with your question of regulation, in part because I've been writing about this for the past few months. And I think when we're talking about creator regulation, it's important to kind of separate out the regulation for creators versus regulation from creators. And so the former is this notion of regulation for creators. I think how do we better protect and empower them and support them to pursue their creative craft while still getting compensated? And I think for a while, a lot of the labor movements that sprung up kind of fizzled out. It's really hard when you're thinking about how to unify a category of workers who are relying on this and for different income streams, some of it full-time, some of it part-time hustle culture. They're working across platform. I mean, we just heard Kelechi talk about how many different platforms and her website. And so how do you think about it, bringing people together on a shop floor we're not working up against a particular employer, but a category of platforms within a larger system of platform capitalism. And of course, workers are geographically dispersed. And so there's been daunting challenges when we think about regulation for creators. And I think in the past year or so, I've been kind of excited to see momentum, and part of it is part of this larger legitimizing of creator work that we've seen, where finally lawmakers are taking this seriously, and understanding that this is a labor class. This is a sprawling unit of individuals who are not just creating content, but are shaping culture, are shaping how we understand the world, from news to information to education. There's still a lot of grassroots organizing, which I think is really auspicious. I've really enjoyed the conversations I've had with folks who are saying, like, we need to think about the legacies of organizing, and this speaks very much to Catherine's work. And thinking about how we can, take the power ourselves and reclaim the power in ways that speak to our own fluencies and are not, reproducing these power hierarchies. So one of the examples I talk about in my book is the Black TikTok strike, and it wasn't really a strike. It was essentially one particular TikToker, Eric Lewis, saying, like, we're not going to keep giving the public our dances for free, given the long history of Black cultural appropriation. And so it was kind of it played with communication fluencies and saying who is best able to call out the power discrepancies. Well, it's people that are communication experts, and that's creators. And so, we see this kind of grassroots as well as the more formal regulation. And so I feel like it's, we're kind of seeing a sea change in terms of regulation for creators. The issue of regulation from creators is really kind of an uphill battle, and because that ranges from everything from fake news to misinformation to the bleach vaccines, which we just heard about. And one of the challenges is the compulsion to constantly post to play to these attention economy logics and go viral. I saw a study that came out, I think about a year ago, from UNESCO. 2/3 of content creators don't fact check. And that is really alarming when you think about how many people rely upon creators and influencers for advice, to learn about the world, to have their opinions guided by seeming experts. And, thus far, when we do see regulators cracking down on the lack of transparency, the lack of advertising disclosures, it's on the most vulnerable populations. And so we're not seeing the big advertising companies, with some exceptions, being forced to pony up the dollars for, explicitly requiring that the individuals they're partnering with don't disclose. Instead, we're seeing it on someone who's kind of barely scraping by and needs this money, and so they get hit with a fine. And so I think, I see it as very challenging to think about how we don't protect labor creators as a labor class, but how we also think about how to enable kind of a flourishing civic sphere when we are forced to reckon with these kind of attention economy logics that compel people to participate in rage baiting and misinformation and disinformation and so on and so forth. So I think this moment now is going to be kind of a key inflection point, for better or worse.
Thank you, Brooke. I think I'll jump in. I want to come at this from two different angles. First, I'm really appreciating all the conversation from folks in the room. I gather that there is a very large group of students. So my first response is literally a laundry list of key terms by people smarter than I am. Take it as a lit review in 1 minute. And then my second response, which is what I really want to talk about, will focus on influencers and creators in the age of Gen AI. So first, I think it's important for us to pin down exactly what we're talking about when we say creator labor. And there are four things. The first one, are we talking about the nature of creator labor? In which case, scholars have talked about digital labor, as workers within a digital and media industry. They've talked about user labor when you're online and just by default of being a user, platforms extract. There's platform mediated workers in gig economies, creator economies, where the platform shapes you into becoming a worker. There are formal workers in the whole industry, like content moderators and programmers. Then there's also the concept of co-creative labor, where you make things together with media content and your experiences. There's immaterial labor. Is it a service, a cultural product, knowledge? There's creative labor. It's a symbol of activity, it's status making. There's flexible labor as well, where your work is not fixed. It sounds beautiful and wonderful and so empowering that you can work anywhere, anytime. But as Brooke's books will tell you, is that really true? So that brings us to the second thing. What about the condition of creator labor? And here, lots of scholars have spoken about precarious labor, which is the reality of that flexibility. More recently, algorithmic labor is the automation taking over what we're doing and making our lives easier or making it trickier for us to function. There is sticky labor, especially in the Asia Pacific societies where there is an intensification of surveillance. And so we are attached to the platform on a collective level and we have declining autonomy, but we don't have choice. Very foundational work and communication in the US, there's venture labor, where you invest your time, your capital, your interests in the hopes that it will make you a better employee. There's aesthetic labor, where you have got capacities that you embody, that you imbue, and then you bring that into employment as a very attractive worker. And then, of course, there's entrepreneurial labor. Do you have self-investment? Do you do compulsory networking? Do you have portfolios online in order to come off as the right kind of entrepreneur? Stage 3, what about the strategy of creator labor? Is it effective labor, relational labor, intimacy labor, glamour labor, visibility labor? There is a whole stream here to focus on. But then the fourth one, which is the heart of the question, I think where we're at now, is the anticipation of creator labor. So we know how to do this, what the conditions are like, but why do we do this? Is it prospective labor? It's unpaid work where we feel there's a chance of success. Is it passionate labor? I do it because I love it, so it's okay if you don't pay me, that's fine. Is it aspirational labor per Brooke's work, where it's gendered, there's an entrepreneurial component to your creativity because you think there is a promise of some sort of reward? Is it speculative labor, where you're doing it outside of formal employment in the hopes that it will get you in through the doors to get formal employment? Is it hope labor? You're just wishing that in the future, all of this will eventuate into some kind of employment opportunity. So platforms don't really want us to ask these questions. They like for us to think about the strategy and that they're giving us tools to do the thing. Governments like us to think about the nature of the work. It's supposed to be this way. You've got flexible work anywhere, anytime. Marxists want us to think about the condition. Is this really the way we should be going? But all of us should be thinking about the anticipation of it. Why are we doing this? Is another society possible when everyone and anyone can now be a creator? Should we be continuing on this treadmill or this elevator, this travelator, and just move forward in this way? Where my heart is wrenched now, what keeps me up at night is thinking about what Gen AI means for this industry. This is not to be confused with AI influencers or virtual influencers, which is a whole different body of work. But when we think about automated and AI content generation tools, this is where the slippery slope between an influencer and a creator really mix up. And a human embodied creator with agency, autonomy, agency also becomes now a worker in part of a longer term of toolkit. So one, let's think about authorship and authority. We used to accuse influencers of poor syntax, poor grammar, astroturfing, plagiarism, ghostwriting. All of these things now are sold and packaged to us as positives to make your life easier if you buy this tool, download this platform for like 99 cents. And so we're seeing this shift towards content white labeling, where you don't have to make the thing. This is such a tragic follow-up from white labeling of goods, where people would buy wholesale from online, sew labels, and claim that they're selling you goods at a premium. Secondly, let's think about autonomy and automation. A lot of the discourse around these AI creator tools is about how this frees up your time to do all these wonderful things now that you don't have to think about writing copy or making an image. But in reality, all of this is becoming so standardized and so same that it's not helping you survive in the industry. You're churning them out by the thousands, and it's not empowering you to stand out in the creator economy. And then finally, we can think about the big old question about authenticity. It's been plaguing us since micro-celebrity was a concept. With authenticity and AI, the conversations I'm seeing are no longer about whether it's human-made or machine-made. It's often about the effort put in through the prompt engineer. Everyone's a prompt engineer if you've got ChatGPT open once upon your life. This critique and criticism over who gets to ask the right questions, who gets to outsmart AI. And this is where suddenly all our degrees in the room become relevant again, because we can teach that. AI cannot teach you to interact with AI well. And it's not about outsmarting the system, it's about injecting the human back into the system, which gives me a bit of hope and optimism for what is already a very depressing conversation about our futures.
Thank you so much. Totally agree with everything that's been said, really. I can't tell you how I know, because it's not something that can be quantified, because I'm a woo-woo girl. I do a lot of tarot and astrology, right? So to go with that pseudoscience, as some people might see it, it's coming crashing down, and that's not to depress anybody or to make anybody lose hope. We need it to. We need all of this that we know, because the people who are making the most amount of profit from everything that we're doing, from all of our creativity, still goes back to these corporations, still goes back to a lot of these men primarily that we're seeing doing the most heinous things behind the scenes, and sometimes not even behind the scenes, right in front of our faces, but there's nobody to hold them accountable, because when you have a certain level or a certain amount of power and influence and proximity to governmental structures, who really is going to hold you accountable? So for the sake of our autonomy and our agency, we are going to eventually divest en masse from social media in the way that we know it. These platforms, we still do want to tell stories, we still do want to create, we still do want to connect, but we're going to get very creative about how we do this, because we didn't always have this setup. And when we realize the amount of surveillance that's now coming alongside making the content in the way that we do. There's that guy on social, or is it on TikTok, or he's across the platforms, where just by a snapshot of where you're making your video, within a few minutes or whatever, he can find where you are in the world. And we're watching this and we're like, ha 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 ha, no, because if he can do it, other people can do it as well. And then we have to start thinking, I know that's not the point of our conversation right now, but when I think about, for instance, the content creators who are making spicier content on specific platforms, their safety, they're really worried about that at the moment, because some of these people who are subscribing, some of these men, are trying to use these same tools to track them down, to essentially dox them. So we are going to find ourselves in a rather precarious situation, where we're having to think even more so about our security, our physical security, and not just think of the online space as merely an online space. Some people say it's not that deep, it's only the internet, switch off your phone. Well, now that the internet, as it were, is embedded, entrenched into every facet of our life, so many people loved watching You on Netflix, and they saw the ways that it was written into the character that he would track down this person that he was interested in. We start thinking about that on a broader scale now, because initially it was just the quote unquote influencers or content creators who would know to delay when they're posting, so they're not at the location at the time of posting. But some people aren't as well versed at doing some of these things, and we're seeing that there are real life consequences to that. So I think with the simultaneous kind of crumbling of celebrity culture, people will want as much as possible at a point to move further away from that sort of aesthetic, and they want to be seen as everyday as possible. Um, and so that's going to play a role into how we continue to use social media. The platforms are becoming very wily with how they're monetized, how they're paying people now. They're making it way more difficult. A video with similar metrics you could have gotten $2,000 for before, now you're getting $200 for it, because they're shifting the goalpost as they see fit. That's going to cause some tension as well. And as Crystal mentioned earlier, there are these groups now, the Facebook groups and the such that people have, and there are some terrible ones that men have been talking about, very vile things to do to women. But I think there's going to be more of an uptick of people just taking themselves into other spaces or using platforms. I think one of the most recent ones I've heard about is Upscrolled, right? Or Upscroll, where they say that there is no algorithmic bias, and you can post your social justice content and all will be fine. But will all of these people go and sign up to that when they want some level of escapism as well? So I see all of this, because what goes up must come down. I see all of this sort of like imploding soon enough, because the people who own the companies are going to be held to account probably over the next 10 years. It's not something I see happening overnight, but over the next 10 years, you're going to have to hold those people accountable. Then what happens to the companies that they've built if we have to hold them accountable for the ways that they have been impeding on our rights globally? So that's going to mean that at some point people have to think about where they go in smaller groups to create the things that they want to create. And more than ever, people will yearn to again connect in real life as well, and have the physical groups that they can go to. And I welcome it, which is why I've been saying for a couple of years now, sort out your mailing list, or sort out what kind of community do you want to have. So I've with my website, I've got the members area, but also in the members area, I've built a forum, or I've kind of designed a forum where people can live chat. They can, so if we're watching something, they can talk with each other, they can message each other, and it's fine. I don't talk about it like it's a democracy. To a certain degree, no trigger warning, it's a dictatorship. If I see any nonsense happening there, you're getting kicked out, because it has to be a space where people can kind of work through thoughts, and like-minded people meet in that space. And I think more people will go on to create those sorts of things for themselves. And that gives me hope, because one of the scariest things, as Crystal mentioned, was this sameness that we're headed towards, which I think to some degrees serves fascist sort of authoritarianism, kind of ideological structures, when everybody is the same, and so therefore everybody can be accounted for. If anybody steps out of line, then it's the punitive measures are kind of easy or easier to kind of meter out. And so yeah, I'm actually hopeful for things to kind of fall about, crumble, be moved about, rejigged, because I think that helps to move over the kind of like dismantle the current power structures that are in place that make it so marginalized folk, or racially minoritized folk can't actually express themselves in the way that they need to.
I have at least 7,000 more questions for you all, but I feel like I've asked quite a bit of mine. I want to make sure we do get to a few that came up in the chat, but I also want to give you all space for things that we didn't get to in our conversation. So please feel free to direct your attention wherever it is. I've enjoyed every piece of this. One question that I said I would get back to, and maybe Crystal, you would be so kind as to give us just a brief kind of you've already given me, and I'm going to take this recording to my folks who are doing their comprehensive exams, because you did give like the most brilliant of literature reviews right now for folks to track some terms. But maybe you could do one more for us, which is just that distinction between influencer and creator that we kind of started with. And I think that will hopefully bleed into a couple of other conversations that we want to have.
Sure. The starting point is for us to think about internet infrastructure from Web 1 to Web 4. We've gone from the read web to the read write to the read write own to the read write own govern. And in between those things, major shifts are encouraging the shift from influencer to creator culture. Between 1 and 2, Influencers used to think about maintaining online communities and analog strategies because you could only read like a blog. But with Web 2, when you can create content, then the strategies of affect and aspiration were being removed and channeled towards algorithms and how algorithms were now changing the way we do attention online. Between Web 2 and 3, we saw the rise of virtual influencers and AI influencers, but we also became more cognizant of the new forms of creator labor and leadership behind the scenes. We suddenly realized that, oh, you know what? Behind the blogger, there might have been a manager, or like the platform designer, or the photographer, or the prompt engineer, or someone that actually does the work behind the face, just like a Hollywood actress would have an entourage. Same thing here. When we see a virtual influencer, it's making very visible and relevant the fact that this persona is artfully designed by a voice actress whose name you probably don't know, a designer, a moderator, the community person who manages the Discord, etc. And then between Web 3 and 4, we are thinking about the mass automation of content generation. We're also thinking about how suddenly creator productivity becomes precarious because it feels like everything can be automated and then apparently self-governed with like sentient AI. All of these are helping us shift from an influencer culture where we used to think about persona, affect, self-branding, reputation, to now a creator culture where we're thinking about pure content, algorithms, pure engagements, transients, trends, platforms paying out affiliate marketing as opposed to personal advertorials and sponsorship. Why does this matter? When we had influencer culture, we held them accountable. Call out culture and cancel cultures was somewhat effective because leadership went to the person as the hub and people went there and worshipped them, in Kelechi's humorous words. But now with creator culture, everything is dissipated. We see posts rather than people. And it's difficult to hold people accountable now when platforms seem to be disrupting that connection we used to have. And when people are beholden to the trends that wax and wane that we can't even get a bird's eye view on.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. Another question from folks is I'm just gonna go in order. It's from Max, who says, I'm curious if the panelists have any predictions or commentary on how the recent Australian social media policy is going to influence greater industry and societal well-being. Folks have thoughts on that? If not, it's okay too. We'll hold that one maybe for a moment. Okay, let's hold that one. Thanks, Max, for your question. We'll hold it and it might come up again as we move through. The next one here about having multiple personas or perceptions on social media. So the question here is, if folks do that right, of holding multiple personas and perceptions on social media, how do we think that approach to branding, which I think you just talked about a little bit, the shift from branding to this idea of content creation, right? Personal branding connects to Jay-Z's perception and construction of their identity. So we've talked a lot about like performance and participation in the labor market. I think this question is pointing us toward what impact does this have on the self to not be forced, but in some ways to your only way of participating in social media is to be a part of, in some ways, content creator culture. What impact does that have on construction of the self or construction of identity?
I actually think it's really useful. I think one of the things that I've struggled with throughout the years is people pretending that we are just one thing. You meet somebody and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" And you're meant to just, I'm a, whereas I do this and I do this and I do a number of things, but operating in a society that we have done over the last, I'd say, few decades, it seems polite and the right thing, and it shows yourself to be together to only do the one thing. But we are seeing that people are multifaceted beings, and I think it's actually a good thing to be able to see different aspects of a person, to see the kind of different interests that they have. And it's actually I would say, from what I've seen, it's a smart approach to how you use social media, because you only present one aspect of yourself. You're only probably going to get one type of audience, but you show the different things that you're interested in. It brings in different types of audiences, or it kind of expands the perception that your audience have of you, your community have of you. So initially, I worried about should I post my Muay Thai, doing Muay Thai fighting? Should I post that? Should I post my tarot and astrology interest? Should I post, because you're told you don't want to post these things because it's going to confuse your audience. Why would it confuse them? What's wrong with them? They should be fine. They can handle it. And I've actually found that that's helped me way more. And also sometimes you're going to meet people in real life and sometimes they're surprised that you have a whole personality, that you're a full human being, crazy. And I think that social media is also useful when you're sharing your different perspectives. It also allows you to set boundaries. So those people who have followed me for a number of years or are part of my community know that if you see me out with my son in public, do not approach me. Just don't. I don't want to say hi. Not because I'm being rude. My son is not part of what I do online. I don't show my son online for various reasons, but mostly in terms of security and preserving his childhood as well. He didn't sign up for the things that I talk about and the things that I challenge on a socio-political or geopolitical level. He didn't sign up for that, so I don't want him kind of involved. So I do see people when I'm out and about, and they might be across the street, and they're like, but they don't come over. And also I've made it clear throughout the years, don't send me trauma. Don't just randomly send me trauma content. Just because I speak about these things doesn't mean I want to open my phone and see some things, but I do have an email address that you can send things to. So when I'm mentally prepared, I know that when I go to that inbox, whatever I see is whatever I see, as opposed to being tagged in things. So I think it is helpful to show different aspects of oneself because it helps to give a more holistic view of you, depending on what you want to share, but also it allows people to meet you where you're at. They don't think of you as just one thing, which can be quite problematic.
I'll just quickly add, I fully agree, especially thinking about going back to Goffman and presentation of self. I mean, we are complex beings and we vary our self-presentation, but we embody different characteristics. And so there's this kind of push from brands to be a consistent self-brand that maintains a singular persona across a raft of social media platforms, but that's not how people act. That's not how people are. And so I see it as quite empowering on one hand, the fact that there are so many different platforms where people can showcase different elements of themselves and find a different audience and share in different ways. The flip side of the coin is it's so much more labor when we think about platform fatigue, and we're going from like 2 platforms to 3 platforms to now 6 and 7 platforms, and it's a risk mitigation tactic for sure, and is empowering for all the reasons we talked about. But again, coming back to the labor element, when you're thinking like, do I really want to have not just 6 or 7 platforms, but also, the visual one and the one that has short form video? But of course, we know they all have become the same.
This is so good and so helpful for me. I'm thinking right now, I mean, in my own work, I'm thinking a lot about content creators, but also about what content creation does for, quote, the rest of us. So those of us who do not consider ourselves content creators, I know, Brooke, you touched on this, and Crystal in your work as well, how much of those of us who don't consider ourselves content creators are still feeding systems of content creation. And I'm really curious also about what it does for our identity to be a part of a society where content is the expectation in these socially mediated platforms. What does it do for the way that folks who have 15 followers on Instagram create reels to, talk about their travels? They're still branding themselves to 15 people with no expectation of monetization. What is this doing for us in our sociality? That was really, I'm so grateful. This was really the impulse for a lot of the conversation today. There was a great final question in the chat about sociality in the comment section that I wish we could spend more time on, but I'm really aware of time. We're going to start kind of wrapping up. I want to thank you all so much for your contribution to this conversation. It has been absolutely phenomenal to hear from you, to hear about your work, to hear the ways that your work intersects, which many of us were familiar with, but hopefully many more folks on the call were able to see. I'm going to ask Cherice to go ahead and pop our slides back in the chat so we can begin the wrap up here. So I know what I'm on cue for here to wrap up properly. But this has been just such a phenomenal conversation. I want to do a couple of reminders. One is to please, 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 we would appreciate feedback on this event. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're still on the call before you head out, take just a brief moment to respond to the poll that just came up on your screen for some event feedback. We just want to know a little bit about how you found us, and if you're likely to attend some events in the future. These are anonymous surveys. They will only be viewed by our event staff to help make more possibilities in the future for us. I also want to talk a little bit about some upcoming events that are happening with the Disco Network. The Disco Network's final event for the academic year is another lovely panel, but this one is called Against Surveillance and Spectacle, Building Global Resistance to Tech-Mediated Oppression. It's hosted by our Disco Network PI, Remy Yergo, and this panel brings together activists, scholars, and writers to explore connections between critical social issues like health justice, discrimination, techno-fascism, and surveillance, and the possibilities of grassroots responses. This event is on Tuesday, March 10th, and it is a hybrid event that will take place concurrently at the University of Michigan campus and on Zoom. For more information and the link to register, please use the link that is in the chat. If you enjoyed our event, we encourage you to please keep in touch with us. Follow the Disco Network on our social media accounts, where you can be the first person to find out about upcoming events like this panel series. Go out and please support also all of the folks that were on this panel. Buy their books, follow them on their socials. They all, if you enjoyed what they were saying today, I can guarantee you that they are saying all these things in the wonderful publications that they are putting forward. Support them, please, and support their work. Thank you very much to the panelists. I have appreciated my time with you, and thank you so much to the folks who made this possible, all of the Disco staff, and thank you to you, the attendees. Please come and hang out with us again soon. That's all for us today. Bye.